everything you need to start your morning. This is Good Day Tampa Bay.
Rain late in the week. Kristen?
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Well, the release of the first wave of documents in the George Zimmerman case grabbed headlines Thursday and Friday, and we'll discuss that with you next hour. But let's start with a couple of other legal developments. In Orlando, charges were filed earlier this month against 13 people in connection to the hazing death of FAMU band member Robert Champion. And it wasn't exactly what Champion's family or some legal experts expected. Joining us this morning to talk about the FAMU case and other legal headlines is attorney Felix Vega. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Kristen.
Well, back in December, Robert Champion's autopsy results were released by the medical examiner, and they were ruled, his death was ruled a homicide.
Correct.
Now, yet the state attorney's office in Orlando decided to only file hazing charges against those they think are responsible. How does that happen, and how do hazing laws work?
Well, the hazing law, we actually have a graphic that we can pull up in terms of what actually they needed to prove. And State Attorney Lawson Lamar made a point to stress that you only have to prove that there was an act of hazing and it caused serious bodily injury or death. It's a third-degree felony, and you can only get up to 5 years in prison. Now, the difference between that and manslaughter is where a lot of people are drawing the line, because if you look at the manslaughter laws, they cover a course of conduct. And in this case, the state attorney said that there were so many defendants, and a lot of legal experts agreed that it would be difficult to prove a manslaughter case because you had so many people involved in his death. The counter argument to that would be that, well, you have this course of conduct, and inside the hazing statute, it covers any sort of brutality, physical injury. So there is basically a disconnect between the hazing and the manslaughter laws, where you could say that it could be manslaughter because you don't have to prove that one single person ultimately caused the death. It was the group and the group act that caused the death of Robert Champion. But they filed the charges, and now the case is going to proceed from here.
And so, of course, this tragedy really turned the spotlight onto the culture of hazing that had been going on within the FAMU band for years.
Exactly.
And presumably with the students that were in the band. But there's another issue here, and that's which students were allowed to perform, or who was allowed. I shouldn't say students, we're talking about who was allowed to perform in the band.
This was a twist to the case that came out last week, and Julian White, who was the band director, he was basically forced out of being the band director originally, but then they went ahead and reinstated him. Then last week it came out that over 101 people who were in the FAMU band were not students at Florida A&M University. And when Julian White was approached about that, he said that there was no process in place to determine who was a student or who qualified to be in the band, which shows an utter collapse of supervision from the top down inside the band, and also who was looking out for the students. The other interesting thing is that 3 of the people that are charged in Robert Champion's death were not students at FAMU at the time, but still were on that bus with the band. What's more disturbing than that is 3 of the people that were charged were also in Robert Champion's funeral procession, and that has caused a lot of it's very disheartening for the family, because Robert Champion's mom, through their attorney, told ABC News last week that she had received dozens of calls expressing condolences from those people that were in the band. Come to find out that 3 of the people that were in her son's funeral procession were also going to be charged with his death. So she was appalled at finding that out, and you can only imagine how she feels in the end.
Oh, that's absolutely just unbelievable.
It's heartbreaking.
But last thing, just real quick, we don't have a lot of time yet, but O.J. Simpson is back in the news.
Once again.
He's fighting for a new trial in this bizarre Las Vegas robbery case that landed him back in prison in 2008. He says his new lawyers say his old lawyers didn't do a good job. He should go free. Could this really work to get him out of jail?
It could work, but this is so routine and so funny that we never get to cover this side of what happens in a criminal case. Basically, he's saying that his lawyers were ineffective in his criminal trial that happened in 2008, and then it went up on appeal. His appeal was denied, so now he's saying that both his lawyers were ineffective at the time of the trial and also at the time of the appeal. So hundreds of these cases go on every single day here in Hillsborough County and all across the country. So whether or not it's going to work, a lot of trial strategy comes into play in making that determination. Ultimately, the burden's on him to prove that his lawyers didn't do a good job for him. In the end, I don't think it's going to work.
All right. Thank you, Felix. It's always great to have you.
Thank you, Kristen.
And we'll see you back here at about 8:45 this morning to talk about the TRAYVON Martin case.
Lots to talk about on that.
Yes, we do. All right. When we come back, it seems there is an app for just about everything these days, including beauty. That's right. There is a new app that promises... Well, new evidence is released in the Trayvon Martin murder case. Bloody pictures, autopsy results, and hundreds of pages of documents. The question is, what does it all really tell us? Attorney Felix Vega joins us this morning to discuss just this. And Felix, you've gone through this long and complicated stack of documents and uncovered new and very interesting details. Good morning to you.
Good morning again, Kristen.
So does the recently released evidence support George Zimmerman's claim of self-defense, or does it jive better with what Trayvon Martin's family and his supporters believe happened that night in Sanford?
It depends on which part of the 183 pages of documents that you're reading. We know the witness statements have been all over the place, but it was very interesting to go through the actual timeline and have an accurate depiction of what happened the night of the incident. We know that the gunshots went off at about 7:17 according to George Zimmerman's 911 call, and it was about 9:44 before the medical examiner actually got on scene. It wasn't until the next morning that they discovered who Trayvon Martin was. He went into the ME's office as a John Doe. His father actually filed a missing persons report. And then later on, about 2 days later, we have actually a part of the police report we can pull up where Trayvon Martin's dad actually went into the Sanford Police Department. He wanted to know why his father, or why the shooter of his son had not been arrested yet. And the detective in the case actually made Trayvon Martin's dad listen to those 911 calls. As you can see right there at the bottom of the screen, he said that it was not his son's voice crying for help on those 911 calls. It was very emotional for him to listen to that, but it was something the detectives felt was necessary in order to show where they were at in the investigation.
Fascinating. Now, Trayvon Martin's autopsy results have also been released, and a lot was made about the toxicology report that showed the teenager had trace amounts of THC in his system, which is found in marijuana. And Felix, you found something else in Trayvon's autopsy. What was it?
There was, in the autopsy report, a lot of people made a big deal out of an injury that was on Trayvon Martin's hand, and it was a 1/4 by 1/8 inch cut on his left ring finger. That was it. It was a small abrasion. You can see this is actually a part of the medical examiner's report. A lot of people were saying, and legal experts were saying, well, this clearly proves that it was self-defense, that he attacked George Zimmerman. It doesn't mean that at all. This is just one part of the report. It's one piece of evidence, and the fact that it was such a tiny abrasion, we're not talking about injuries, plural, as a lot of people were saying. It was one tiny injury on his hand. It was also compelling to go through all the FDLE reports in the case because they collected George Zimmerman's clothing, Trayvon Martin's clothing. They compared all the clothing. They looked at the blood stains on it. There were only trace amounts of each other's blood on each other's clothing. So there wasn't like a massive blood loss, for example, to support that Trayvon Martin was on top of George Zimmerman when he shot him. Also compelling the FDLE ballistics report that showed that it was a close range and contact gunshot to his clothing. He was actually wearing the hoodie that we've heard so much about, another sweatshirt underneath. There was gunpowder residue right on top of the clothing itself. You peel that away, you get to the actual gunshot wound itself on Trayvon Martin's chest. It was directly through his chest into his heart. That's what ended up killing him. But there was a 2-inch by 2-inch patch of stippling, which is actually gunpowder residue that was actually embedded in his skin, and also an abrasion that was about 3/8 of an inch around, which is also indicative of a close range gunshot. A lot of people called it intermediate. I'm saying it looks like it was more very close to the clothing and went through and printed on his chest as well.
It's a very detailed report. Now, so many agencies became involved in the investigation, from FBI to FDLE to the Jacksonville State Attorney's Office. And you discovered something interesting in these new documents, also concerning Trayvon's autopsy. Who performed it? It
was actually the Volusia County Medical Examiner's Office, and Volusia County encompasses Daytona Beach. But the way that the jurisdictions are set up over there, for example, the court system in Seminole County comprises Seminole County and also Brevard County. But for the medical examiner's jurisdiction, it's actually Volusia County and Seminole County. And for people that aren't familiar with the court systems in Florida, we have 67 counties, there's 20 court systems or judicial circuits, and then there's 24 medical examiners districts. So it's another player in this case that came on board. A lot of people thought Sanford was involved in it, that they were the ones to perform the autopsy. Actually went to Daytona Beach.
And finally, real quick, it seems like we're locked in this battle between the media, the courts, and how we cover high-profile cases. Once again, Angela Corey, the special prosecutor, made this statement on Friday. She said the public's right to know should never trump the state's right to a fair trial, or equally the defendant's right to a fair trial. I would say that nothing should be public until the trial comes. So Was the release of all this evidence the right thing to do?
It was an interesting dynamic, and we always get in this tug of war, like you said. And under state statute, the public records law in Florida are very broad, and so anything that's turned over by the state attorney to the defense automatically becomes public record, and that way the media can get its hands on it. And we get in this tug of war all the time between the press, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, what should be released, what shouldn't be released, why aren't they hiding certain things. And people need to realize that as part of the press, I'm in an interesting position because I'm on both sides of this issue with the media and also being a prosecutor. And people need to realize that the press, by way of the Constitution, we have a duty to perform, and that is to report on these things and make the public informed. And this is always going to be a dynamic that's going to be in play. The reports were released, and Angela Corey made another important point, is wait for everything to come out, because the only thing that we can be sure of is there's going to be a lot of unexpected material to come forth, and let the case play itself out in the end.
All right, very insightful as always.
Thanks, KRISTIN.
Felix. And if you'd like to read the entire 183-page discovery file released by prosecutors, we've put a link on myfoxtampabay.com. You can find it by clicking on Seen on TV. We'll be right back.